हेलो स्टूडेंट्स, वेलकम टू यूपीएससी क्रॉनिकल्स। और आप हिस्ट्री ऑप्शनल के लिए एंशिएंट इंडिया की लेक्चर सीरीज देख रहे हैं। दोस्तों, पिछली क्लास में हमने हड़प्पन इकोनॉमी को ख़त्म कर लिया था, राइट। हमने इकोनॉमी में 3 पार्ट्स बनाए थे, जिसमें सब्सिस्टेंस, क्राफ्ट एक्टिविटीज एंड ट्रेड एंड कॉमर्स में हमने उसको डिवाइड किया था। और हमने तीनों पार्ट ही बारी बारी से ख़त्म कर लिए। साथ में कुछ क्वेश्चंस भी किए थे। एक करेक्शन यहाँ पे आप कर लेना, ये जो स्कॉलर के नाम में थोड़ी सी गलती हो गई थी। तो ये जो सेरिन भटनागर है, ये भटनागर नहीं है, ये रत्नागर है। सेरिन रत्नागर, ठीक है। आई एम सॉरी फॉर दैट। ये चीज आप करेक्ट कर लेना अपने नोटबुक में, ठीक है। तो आज की वीडियो जो है हड़प्पन पॉलिटी, हड़प्पन सोसाइटी, हड़प्पन रिलीजन, इसके ऊपर होगी और पॉसिबली डिक्लाइन के ऊपर वीडियो होगी। पर डिक्लाइन में थोड़ी, क्योंकि कुछ थ्योरीज हैं डिक्लाइन में, तो अननेसेसरी वीडियो की लेंथ लंबी ना हो जाए, इसलिए डिक्लाइन को हम किसी सेपरेट वीडियो में कवर करेंगे। तो आज की जो वीडियो है वो कम्प्लीटली हड़प्पन पॉलिटी, सोसाइटी एंड हड़प्पन रिलीजन के ऊपर है। So Harappan polity. How do we know about polity of Harappan civilization, or for that matter, anything about Harappan civilization? We have archaeological evidences, right? Through archaeological evidences, we come to know about any aspect of Harappan civilization. But as we have seen earlier, that just archaeological evidences or material remains is not sufficient to construct a complete picture of any time period. सिर्फ मटेरियल रिमेन्स से पूरी कंप्लीट पिक्चर तैयार नहीं की जा सकती है। और आर्कियोलॉजिकल एविडेंसेस के अपने लिमिटेशंस होते हैं किसी चीज़, किसी नैरेटिव को या किसी पर्सपेक्टिव को इन्फर करने में। एंड जस्ट बाय inferring archaeological evidences, we can go as far as possible from the actual history. So it is very difficult to construct history out of archaeological evidences alone. What we need at least is the literary evidences, which is at the time being not been deciphered. So in the lack of this written evidences, confusion is imminent. Confusion is bound to be there. And rightly so. In case of Harappan civilization, we have already seen so many confusions, so many different theories about origin, about progression, about the interpretation of different structures and different material remains. And just by changing the nature of a structure or any material remain, the entire theory can change. So a lot of confusion is there while studying Harappan civilization. And Harappan polity, to construct Harappan polity out of evidences what that we have in form of material remains, is definitely not possible at this moment. So there are multiple theories about Harappan polity, covering both the spectrum, like from the Harappan Empire to stateless societies. Many scholars believe that the entire civilizational sphere come under a single state, an empire, the Harappan Empire. While there are some scholars also, like Gregory Poschel, we have, and we have, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name, Gregory Poschel and Schaffer. So these scholars believe that there was not a continuous empire, because what was the basis of the theory of Harappan Empire? The uniformity, right? Cultural continuity, uniformity throughout the entire landscape, throughout the entire civilizational sphere. But these scholars like M.R. Mughal, Gregory Poshel or Schaffer, so they highlighted the regional variations. They highlighted the discontinuities as well, and to try to prove that it was not a single empire, rather it was a fragmented states. Or some scholars going to conclude that it was not even a state. It has not reached the level of a state, so it was in the transitional phase. So we have a lot of theories here as well about Harappan polity. Lucky for you, as an aspirant, UPSC has never asked questions about Harappan polity because no one is sure about Harappan polity. Going by the nature of questions UPSC is asking, we are less likely to see questions on Harappan polity for the for some years at least. But that doesn't mean that we should leave this topic. We should cover this topic just like we have covered other topics, because we do not know what UPSC can ask. We do not know, simply do not know what UPSC can ask. The nature of this exam is very unpredictable, right? So we cannot leave any margin of error in our preparation. And me as a teacher cannot take that risk. So we will cover Harappan polity as well, and we should understand the nature of debate about Harappan polity. So a political ideology like the communication system, the the political structure, how the state was run, the administrative mechanism, all these things are impossible to deduce from archaeological evidences. For that, we need literary evidences. But some evidences indicate towards the presence of a state, presence of administrative mechanism, like uniformity of script and standardization, and the presence of granaries and storage, storage bins or storage pits. So these suggest the uniformity in town planning. These evidences suggest towards the presence of a regulating class, at least the administrative class. Again, who were these administrative class? Who were this ruling class? We have no idea. Some say this administrative class was the priests. Some say the Harappan civilization was ruled by merchants. Some say it was ruled by bureaucrats, or some say it was ruled by warriors. But we have no solid evidence, no substantive evidence to prove any of this theory. We do not know whether it was ruled by priests or merchants or any other class. We simply have no clue about that. All the theories about Harappan polity is just a speculation. Therefore, you must keep in mind that while writing something or anything about Harappan polity, you should never reach to a conclusion. You should never reach to any conclusion. So political ideology is impossible to deduce from archaeological evidence. But you can always debate whether there was a state or whether there was no such state. So all the theories about Harappan polity revolves around two things. What was the nature of a state and who were the rulers? What was the nature of a state and who were the rulers? Basically, if we can write this, the debates, the type of debates. So we are basically concerned about two different types of debates. First is whether the Harappan civilization, the entire geographical area was a state or it was stateless. And if there was a state, then what kind of state, what was the nature of a state, किस तरह की state थी. So these are the two types of debates which we are going to explore. And also, if it was a state, then whether the Harappan state was a centralized state or decentralized. So first we understand the theory of centralized state. Sometimes it is also thought as Harappan Empire. Centralized state. What is the basis of this? Okay, first understand who were the different scholars and what type of centralization they have discussed so far. So some scholars such as Mortimer Wheeler argued that it was an efficient bureaucratic system. Efficient ब्यूरोक्रेटिक सिस्टम. जैसे हम एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन देखते हैं ना आज के टाइम में कि ऑफिसर्स रूल करते थे, ऑफिसर्स अपने हिसाब से करते थे चीजें. So there was no ruler, or there might be a ruler, but the state was run by administration, the bureaucrats. So efficient bureaucratic system. There was an efficient bureaucratic system जिसने ट्रेड में भी रेगुलेशन लगाई और जो हमारी एक स्टैंडर्डाइजेशन देखने को मिलती है और यूनिफॉर्मिटी देखने को मिलती है, तो वो एक एफिशिएंट ब्यूरोक्रेटिक सिस्टम की वजह से ही पॉसिबल हो सकती है. सो दिस वाज द थ्योरी पुट फॉरवर्डेड बाय मॉर्टिमर व्हीलर. Another theory that John Marshall propounded, that it was the Harappan state was a theocratic state. So it was a theocracy. Theocracy means ruled by religion or ruled by priests. And some scholars such as Shireen Ratnagar and to an extent R.S. Sharma as well, they said that the Harappan state was plutocracy. Plutocracy means the state is ruled by rich merchants, or wealthy people. So they said the state was ruled by rich merchants. So these are primarily three types of theories in favor of centralized state theory or Harappan Empire theory. So what was the basis of this theory? What evidences they suggested, they showed, they highlighted to explain this centralized empire theory? So they highlighted the presence of granaries. What do granaries suggest? Granaries suggest that surplus was extracted. Granaries suggest the surplus was extracted and appropriated and stored in these granaries or in the redistribution centers. So this suggests a mechanism of administration which facilitated these transfer of grains from surplus regions or the production centers to the redistribution center. Then uniformity in town planning. Standardization. Of weights and measures. uniform script, absence of conflict. So these were the evidences they put forward to support the theory of centralized state. Now, presence of granaries you have understood. What does the presence of granaries suggest? Presence of granaries suggests that surplus was appropriated and stored at the redistribution centers. So this shows the presence of some sort of administrative mechanism which facilitated this transfer. Now, town planning में uniformity in town planning, and that too in distant regions like from Harappa to Sindh and Gujarat, and almost everywhere we see there is uniformity in town planning, at least from the at the superficial level, or from there is some sort of blueprint. There is some sort of blueprint in planning, urban planning. So this also shows that there was some sort of norm, some sort of a standard, and that also suggests the presence of a ruling class for the entire region. Then standardization of weights and measures, and that too for the entire Harappan civilization, shows some sort of economic regulation which facilitated trade, because trade needs trust and dispute resolution. So for trust and dispute resolution, you need standardization of weights and measures. Like what कि अगर आपकी कोई क्वांटिटी हड़प्पा में 1 किलो में जितनी क्वांटिटी आ रही है, वही धोलावीरा में या कालीबंगान में उतनी ही क्वांटिटी 1 किलो में भी आए, सेम क्वांटिटी होगी तो ट्रेड ज़्यादा सुगम होगी, ज़्यादा अच्छे तरीके से फ्लो करेगी. लेकिन अगर डिस्प्यूट होगी कि हमारी जगह की हड़प्पा के 1 किलो मान लो कुछ ज़्यादा क्वांटिटी ऑफ नंबर ऑफ आइटम्स हो और धोलावीरा के 1 किलो में नंबर ऑफ आइटम्स ज़्यादा हो, सो दैट विल लीड टू डिस्प्यूट. So standardization of weights and measures facilitate trade, and it integrates a wider, uh, areas into an economic zone. So it leads to economic integration. Uniform script. It is possible that Harappan civilization encompassed a wide geographical area, and different regions must have their own dialect and maybe language. But a uniform script is visible throughout the entire civilization. So that shows there is a supervising authority above them. So this also points toward a centralized state and the absence of conflict, except that 37 skeletons at Mohenjo-Daro, in the streets of Mohenjo-Daro, we have no, any such evidence of, conflict, and we have mostly evidences of peaceful coexistence. So absence of conflict means there was an efficient system of, justice delivery. There was an efficient system of justice delivery. So that again points towards, and that too in the entire Harappan civilization zone. So that too points the presence of a centralized empire. So these were the basis on which some scholars like Mortimer Wheeler or John Marshall or R.S. Sharma or Sri Ratnagar and Stuart Piggott as well. Stuart Piggott. So they forwarded this theory of centralized empire. But this centralized empire theory has been criticized, as there are certain limitations of this theory. There are certain limitations, or there are certain criticism of this theory. First is archaeological evidence. We have no evidence to support. We have no evidence to substantially establish that there was a centralized state, or there was an state. There was a state. So there are absence of rulers and state symbols or political symbols. Like we have no inscriptions, no figures, no buildings or uh, palaces or royal tombs. We have no such state institutions of that type, which are discovered in case of Mesopotamia or Egypt. So in Harappan civilization, we have no presence of, no evidences of state symbols, like some institutions like royal palaces or royal tombs or some inscriptions, anything. We have no such evidence. Second, initially Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were considered the twin capitals of this centralized Harappan Empire. But in the coming decades, so many sites have been discovered, and there are bigger sites than Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Like we have at least 5 metropolis: Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Rakhigari, Dholavira, and Banweriwala. And Rakhigari is one of the, the largest of all the Harappan sites. And Dholavira was also the bigger sites. It was actually, there was a 3-tier settlement there. So unlike Citadel and Lower Town, Dholavira had Citadel, Middle Town, and Lower Town. So it was also a bigger settlement than Harappa. So there is no clear-cut vision of capital. So no clear capital can be established. There was no clear capital because the material condition is similar throughout the Harappan civilization. So we cannot conclusively say that this was the seat of government or major financial center, economic center. And some scholars suggest that uniformity in culture does not mean political unity. Uniformity in culture does not mean political unity. जैसे 6th सेंचुरी बीसी में जब हम पढ़ेंगे तो महाजनपद पीरियड्स पढ़ते हैं, राइज ऑफ स्टेट्स पढ़ते हैं, सेकंड अर्बनाइजेशन होती है. तो 6th सेंचुरी बीसी में भी जो 16 महाजनपद के बारे में हम पढ़ते हैं, तो वो सभी अलग अलग स्टेट्स थे, लेकिन वो सभी एक सिमिलर कल्चरल स्टेज पे थे. सो कल्चरल यूनिफॉर्मिटी डज नॉट मीन पॉलिटिकल यूनिटी. और सेंट्रलाइज्ड स्टेट में एक जो कोहेशन होती है, कोऑर्डिनेशन होती है, जैसे कई सारे लोग आपस में मिलते हैं, कोहेशन और कोऑर्डिनेशन, वो सेंट्रलाइज्ड स्टेट में कोर्सन से होती है. कोर्सन मीन्स डंडे के बल पे, बाय फोर्स डंडे के बल पे ये कोहेशन एस्टेब्लिश की जाती है, या कोऑर्डिनेशन या कोऑपरेशन एस्टेब्लिश की जाती है सेंट्रलाइज्ड स्टेट में. बट वी हैव नो एविडेंस ऑफ दिस coercive apparatus. We do not know how they coerced people, how they punished people in case of law breaking or in case of disorder. We simply do not have any idea about all this. So although centralized state theory seems the legit answer for Harappan polity, legit explanation for Harappan polity, but still it has certain limitations which this theory cannot answer. So there is another theory of decentralized state. Decentralized state. It is also called segmentary state theory. Segmentary means states are segmented. They are not continuous. They are not just one. Rather, there are multiple states. segmentary state. So later scholars, as there was much excavation done, much research and studies being done on Harappan civilization, so they come to a conclusion. Later scholars come to a conclusion that it was not one empire, rather there were multiple states. So some scholars like M.R. Mughal, Walter E. Fairservice, Gregory Poschel, Jim Schoffer, S.C. Malik, they all try to prove, they all highlighted the regional diversity, cultural variations in different centers, different regions, and they tried to prove that it was not a single empire, rather there were multiple states. So decentralized state were put forwarded by in two ways. Decentralized state was put forwarded in two ways. So Walter E. Fairservice, Walter E. Fairservice, तो वाल्टर ई फेयर सर्विस का क्या कहना है कि इट वाज द जो it was not a state, rather there was this intricate village administration, intricate village administration कि मेन एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन जो है, मेन सीट ऑफ पावर वो विलेजेस में ही थी, और जो टाउन्स थे वो इसी के एक्सपेंशन थे. जैसे मान लो कई सारे विलेजेज हैं, तो ये विलेजेज आपस में इंट्रिकेट है, मिले हुए हैं, और इन सब के कोऑर्डिनेशन से ही चीजें हो रही थी. और ये जो सिटीज हम देखते हैं वो इनके ही कनेक्शन से, इनके ही कोऑर्डिनेशन से ये सिटी डेवलप की गई, and these cities became the regional seats of power. So some villages coordinated and they established these cities, and there was this coordination, the coordination among these villages. So it was intricate village administration that gave rise to Harappan civilization. On the other hand, we have S.C. Malik. अब S.C. Malik कहते हैं कि इनफैक्ट जिम शॉफर भी, जिम शॉफर, S.C. मलिक और जिम शॉफर का कहना है कि ये अभी स्टेट नहीं है, हड़प्पन स्टेट कोई स्टेट नहीं है, बल्कि एक ट्रांजिशनल फेज से गुजर रही है. एक ट्रांजिशनल फेज है. ट्रांजिशनल किसके बीच? ट्राइबल और स्टेट सोसाइटीज के बीच जो ट्रांजिशनल फेज है, जिसको चीफडम स्टेज कही जाती है. सो इट वाज ए चीफडम स्टेज. Harappan state was not full-fledged state, rather it was a transitional chiefdom state. So there were multiple chiefs, and these local chiefs coordinated with each other, and they gave rise to this Harappan urbanization, Harappan civilization, and that's how the entire region was integrated economically or culturally. And in case of cohesion or coordination, how I mean किस तरह से ये विलेज आपस आए, एक तरह से है ना, आपस में जुड़े एक दूसरे से. तो क्या रीजन रही होगी कि ये सभी स्टेट्स आपस में जुड़े एक दूसरे से? सो बेसिस ऑफ कोहेशन वाज इकोनॉमिक इंटीग्रेशन, ट्रेडिशन एंड रिलीजन. इकोनॉमिक इंटीग्रेशन, ट्रेडिशन या शेयर्ड नॉर्म्स जिसको कह सकते हैं, and religion. So this was the basis of coordination or cohesion. What evidences they put forwarded to support this decentralized state theory? So they highlighted regional diversity. They highlighted regional diversity in craft and symbols and beliefs. क्राफ्ट सिंबल्स एंड बिलीव्स, क्राफ्ट सिंबल और बिलीव्स में रीजनल डाइवर्सिटी को उन्होंने शो किया, जैसे कि उन्होंने दिखाया कि जो हमारी आर्टिफैक्ट्स हैं तो अलग अलग जगहों पे उनकी शेप या उनकी यूटिलिटी को लेकर के कई तरह के डिस्टिंक्शंस हैं, कई तरह के पेंटिंग्स को लेकर के डिस्टिंक्शन है। फिर रिलीजियस बिलीव्स में भी हम देखते हैं कि जैसे कालीबंगान में, हम आगे रिलीजन में पढ़ेंगे इस चीज़ को, तो कालीबंगान में और लोथल में हमें फायर अल्टार्स देखने को मिलते हैं, और हड़प्पा मोहनजोदारो में हमें फायर अल्टार्स देखने को नहीं मिलते। सिमिलरली जो फीमेल फिगाइंस हैं, मदर गॉडेस हैं, वो हमें लगभग सभी जगहों पे देखने को मिलते हैं, पर यहाँ कालीबंगान में देखने को नहीं मिलते हैं। फीमेल फिगाइंस आर completely absent in Kalibangan. So there is regional diversity in terms of crafts, in terms of symbols, in terms of beliefs. So on the basis of this, we cannot say that it was a culturally uniform urban center or culturally uniform civilization. There are regional diversity in crafts, symbols and beliefs. ऐसी मलिक कहते हैं कि अगर मान लो कोई रूल कर रहा होगा तो उसकी सिंबल होनी चाहिए। जैसे अगर बुद्धिस्ट रूल करते हैं तो हमें टेम्पल्स दिखती या कुछ ऐसी स्ट्रक्चर जो शो जिससे लगता है कि प्रिस्ट रूल कर रहे हैं। So there is absence of administrative or religious buildings. हमें ना बिल्डिंग्स दिख रहे हैं ना प्रिस्ट दिख रहे हैं, तो कैसे मान ले कि ये प्रिस्ट या मर्चेंट्स या कोई भी रूल कर रहा था यहाँ पे। जैसे मान लो कि अभी आप देखते हैं कि जो स्टेट है तो उस स्टेट के सिंबल्स देखते हैं, आप पुलिस देखते हैं, है ना, कोर्ट कचहरी थाना देखते हैं, तो ये सभी क्या है, ये पार्लियामेंट बिल्डिंग देखते हैं, तो ये सभी स्टेट के सिंबल्स हैं। बट इन हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन नो such kind of symbol is visible. So how can we assume that there was a state if there is no evidence of any state? And there are regional diversity as well. They have highlighted regional diversity. Centralization की तो theory ही basis इस बात पे टिकी हुई थी कि there was uniformity, cultural uniformity. तो इसी कल्चरल यूनिफॉर्मिटी को इन स्कॉलर्स ने, जैसे एम आर मुगल हुए या एसी मलिक हैं या फेयर सर्विस हैं या पॉशेल या फिर शेफर्ड, तो इन्होंने इसी यूनिफॉर्मिटी को ही चैलेंज किया और इसके बेसिस पे ये कहते हैं कि इट वाज नॉट अ सेंट्रलाइज्ड एम्पायर, रादर इट वाज डिसेंट्रलाइज्ड स्टेट और द स्टेट इन ट्रांजिशन, द chieftain state. But these theory have some limitations as well. These theories have some limitation. See, we cannot deny outrightly that there was no standardization. We have seen the standardization in brick size, in 1:2:4 ratio, and almost every site has this standardization of bricks. So decentralized state theory cannot explain how this standardization came into existence, how the town planning came into existence. Same type of town planning throughout the civilization. There was large scale drainage system, town planning, public works, and these required central planning. And uniformity was maintained for 700 years. 700 years. So although we have no evidence of these things, like to prove there was centralization, but some evidences indicate towards centralization, and we cannot deny that outrightly. And if the centralization, if this uniformity was maintained for 7 long centuries, for 700 years, so there was some sort of state control. And although we have no absence, although we have no proof, we have absence of proof, but absence of proof does not mean proof of absence. Absence of proof does not mean proof of expense, proof of absence. कि हमारे पास प्रूफ नहीं है तो इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि ये चीज थी ही नहीं. So absence of proof is not equal to proof of absence. So if we note down these limitations. So this theory cannot explain inadequate explanation of high standardization. Large scale public works, town planning, drainage system required central planning. Uniformity was maintained. Uniformity in script as well. Uniformity in town planning. Uniformity in the weights and measures. The standardization in weights and measures. So all this uniformity was maintained for 700 years. And finally, absence of proof does not mean is not equal to proof of absence. So decentralized state theory also cannot be established wholeheartedly. There are certain lacunas, certain drawbacks, certain limitations. So some elements suggest there are centralization. Some elements suggest there are none. There was no centralization. And scholars have not been able to establish whether there was centralized state, whether there was decentralized state, or whether there was a stateless society. There was no state. So nothing can be said with certainty in the lack of substantive evidences. And the nature of a state must have also evolved in these 7 long centuries. तो सर्टेनिटी के साथ हम कुछ कह नहीं सकते कि क्या जो पॉलिटिकल आइडियोलॉजी क्या रही होगी, एंड सर्टेनली पॉलिटिकल आइडियोलॉजी मस्ट हैव इवॉल्व्ड. So for that we need more evidences, particularly in the form of written records. So in conclusion, nothing can be said with certainty. And while writing about Harappan state, we shall not take any stand whether it was Harappan centralized state or whether it was decentralized state.